you can take quantitative easing, you just can't take QE.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
gotcha.
That is the biggest cop-out I've ever
I feel like
heard.
that's true.
Man,
I'm gonna call
I've
bullshit
never
on
had so
that.
many people tell me what the rules need to be. This is actually the
Wait,
first time ever.
Are we statists? Is that what's going on here?
I just want
Not
people.
fun.
I guess I just want people to drink. That's all. That's all I want.
Can we drink even if we don't say the bad
Yeah, of
words?
course.
'Cause
Yeah,
I
exactly.
wanted to
Yes.
Love that, Nick.
That's just to
thirsty,
ensure
so-
drinking.
Preston, to your
Sure.
point on that, if you think about it, what would a business do when this amount of money is being created and you have to compete? You actually race to technology faster to remove labor, right? But so in an ironic twist of fate, causing the FANG stocks to rise is because it's driving into the things that are and why they're actually growing, and with the network effect. Everybody needs them faster. Shopify, everything else, they're just trying to reduce labor at all costs. So it's actually driving the cycle faster. And to your point on inflation, what is going up? The things that we need most: food, rents, medical, education. Right? Those are the things being artificially inflated because they're most scarce. Some of those are going to change with new distribution of education systems and everything else as a result of the same thing, finding ways to compete differently.
If you go to the Fed's balance sheet and you look at how much it's grown since 2008, 2009 timeframe, you're at a compound annual growth rate of like close to 20% annually.
Right.
And people don't talk about that. They just talk about. I said it. I said Fed, I think, didn't I?
M2 is
Cheers
growing
to
at a rate of
Preston.
25% annualized right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that is everyone just looks at the CPI and they're saying, oh, it's at 2% or it's at 1%. We don't have inflation, and they're totally missing the boat.
Totally missing the boat.
Totally missing the boat.
It's going into the things that the people that you're picking their pockets need the most.
But I think what you just highlighted, Jeff, the only two parts of the economy, the only two spending categories that have been inflationary have been education, which disproportionately impacts young people. And, I finished university in the last financial crisis. I look around me. Actually, today in Slate, there was a great article. They interviewed 700 different people who have education debt, and these people range in age from their 30s to their 60s, right? And they're still paying for their education. So there's that category, which disproportionately impacts young people. And then the other category is healthcare costs. A lot of people talk about this great wealth transfer that's coming from older generations, leaving assets to their children, their inheritors. The issue is that because healthcare costs are rising at such a rapid rate, and because people at their end of life spend 40-50% of their saved assets on preserving quality of life or potentially extending life at a lower quality. You get a situation where that wealth transfer that was anticipated that would pay for the debts of this younger generation isn't taking place. That's going directly into rising healthcare costs. And then you have a generation who's extremely indebted, who's still indebted, who can't even afford a home, basic products, basic services, can't afford things for their own children. And so what you're creating is conditions that are rife for a revolution of some kind. And you feel it. There is a massive generational schism because you have one generation that has benefited greatly from the wealth creation over the last 40 years. And we're basically in a world where our government is run by 16, 70-year-olds who are creating conditions that are ideal for the people who put them in office. We have this whole category of people who are the laborers, and returns to labor, as you've alluded to, are declining rapidly, and potentially labor will be displaced by technology. So what you're creating is an ideal condition for a social revolution. And I very much agree with some of the things Nick has written about Bitcoin as a silent revolution. But I think there's also going to be a very violent revolution that will happen when people start looking at what's happening at the world around them. And I actually think the money printer go burr meme, and the fact that meme reached the level of sort of awareness it did, is a clear indication. Like, never before have you had in popular culture people talking about Fed policy. And now all of a sudden you have a meme and people on the internet sitting at home looking at Fed policy, looking at politics and saying, wait a minute, this isn't right. So to me, we're sort of at this tipping point as a result of inflation disproportionately happening in two categories that are creating this stratification in wealth. And that extreme wealth inequality and wealth disparities compounding now as a result of this crisis. And it's only going to continue to compound. And it's like, what do you get? You get a revolution.
So I've heard a lot of people talk about intergenerational conflict. Does anyone else have a opinion about, you know, what we might see in the next decade per se? I mean, actually, let's jump to Nick, because actually on my podcast, POV Crypto, you talked about this this next 10 years of being like the decade of misery. You know, that was like almost 2 months ago. Do you have that opinion still? And does intergenerational conflict have anything to do with that?
Do things feel miserable or what? You know? I would say, to Meltem's point though, like, the revolution isn't in the future. It's like happening right now. Why, you know, like, I think the protests we've seen sweeping the country have a economic component to them. Obviously, that's not the exclusive cause, but that, my guess is that's part of it. And if you notice, a lot of the discourse is around socialism or wealth confiscation or abolishing landlords and like various like Marxist topics, which, like, unfortunately, like, obviously I don't really agree with any of that stuff, but that's like a natural manifestation of people bearing these education, healthcare, and rent costs. Like, I think that's a big overlooked piece. If you look at rent in downtown, it's extortionate. And like, a lot of that has been flow of capital from other countries looking for safe haven assets in American urban centers. And that's just being borne by like the young would-be professional white-collar class. And for the first time in probably American history, they realize that they're going to be worse off than their parents. So obviously they're going to go smash a few windows. I think that's absolutely part of the chaos that we've seen, is people feeling that they actually don't have an ability to build wealth, to save, to buy financial assets or real estate or property.
Melton, you made a good point a while ago that, you know, you have 60 and 70-year-olds making decisions. Well, you know, there are 83 million millennials out there, so 35 or younger. And the baby boomers, there were 47 million baby boomers. So there's, you know, a lot more millennials, but you have the baby boomers making the decisions. You know, and if you tie that into COVID, you know, I noticed this when Trump was holding his conferences. You had 60, 70, and 80-year-old people up there making decisions about COVID that affected, like, you know, them. But, you know, for the younger people, COVID's really not that big of a risk. So why are we letting the, you know, the older people making decisions for, you know, the largest part of the population?
I think, Brian, if I can add on to that, I think the other piece that people forget, when we look at the Fed balance sheet, right, and when we look at sort of the U.S. government's balance sheet, you know, we have a tremendous deficit right now, to borrow, you know, Donald Trump's favorite word, tremendous. We have a tremendous deficit. The issue with the deficit in this country is what's being reported is not actually what the liabilities on the government's balance sheet are. There's a massive unfunded and underfunded liability to the tune of hundreds of trillions of dollars, which is the entitlements of 60, 70, 80-year-olds, of people who are not going to be participating in the economy. And the government's largest source of revenue, over 75% of government revenue, comes from payroll, individual income taxes, payroll taxes. So what you have here is a group of people who are not accruing wealth. They're not making as much money. They're not able to afford things because the boomers have bought up all the assets and are accumulating wealth at a far greater rate. And then you also have a situation where any new income or any new wealth that's being created is directly being funded into paying for these liabilities for a group of people who have already just benefited so much from the system. So I think, again, if we just look at the sheer numbers, it's just insurmountable. And this is all government debt. We're not even taking into account unfunded or underfunded private pension liabilities. We're not taking into account states' liabilities. We're not taking into account union liabilities. There are a lot of unfunded and underfunded pensions and other entitlement plans out there that are going to have this massive, massive snowball effect. And to me, that's what I worry about. Again, it's a little bit like the monetary theory issue we talked about MMT. Like, do you let it all burn? What do you do? The problem has just gotten so large that Nick, I like this idea of a decade of misery. It's an apt description, but I think there are going to be some really hard choices and hard conversations that need to be had about, and how does this work?
So that's probably in what you said there. Just remember, it's not a US phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon. We have a structural break, and technology is moving so fast today, and every government is stuck in an inflationary policy that's trying to stop that from happening, right? And it's too late. They can't stop it from happening, and technology is going to win no matter what. It's going to it's going to win. But what we do too, and what we got to be careful, I dedicated a whole chapter in my book to the natural thing, and I think Nick talks about it as well, that happens when you have divide, right? When you have people that have everything and others that have nothing, it creates us versus them. And I don't think it's these 60 and 70-year-olds in power. I think they're completely ignorant to the fact that technology is moving this fast. And I think it's a system-wide problem. I think about this a lot, and I think, what would you do in a business if you understood, okay, all these businesses don't know where this is going, and you would ideate on how to create a new business in that, right? That's what, and if you were right, you'd create tons of value as the market moved there. I come back to a really simple premise. We know technology is deflationary, or efficiency, which is deflationary, and we know it takes labor. We don't use technology to make our prices go up, right? We use it to reduce labor and free our time. That technology is also moving exponentially.